Further ado, I have the honor of introducing our second panelist for tonight, Cuitlava Carriola Martinez. Cuitlava Carriola Martinez is a Nahuatl learner, teacher, and language activist. They teach learners of all ages and from diverse backgrounds. Cuitlava has been teaching virtually since 2018 on Zoom, and they've taught at various campuses across Southern California and recently presented a webinar at Central Washington University. The quiz work is primarily centered around the Nahuatl language. Their work in language instruction and activism empowers all communities to speak their Indigenous languages. Thank you, Kui, for joining us tonight and for sharing this space with us. And when you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
Tlaxcamati. So I will be giving a presentation, right? Language work in relation to indigeneity, Latinidad, and identity in Abya Yala. Did you know that there's 7,000 languages spoken around the world, an approximate, and about 10% of those languages are spoken in Abya Yala. So if you didn't know that, now you know. And so I will be speaking about who I am, where I come from, my language work, how does indigeneity and Latinidad manifest in the classroom, and what does indigeneity mean to me, right? We can start by talking about some of the definitions of the words. So language work, right? Language work involves learning a language, right? Acquiring the language and teaching as well, imparting that knowledge, right? The language to people. Learning new methods as you go by, learning how people learn, right? And making sure that, you know, the classroom um, fits a lot of the people there, right? Um, and indigeneity, right? Indigeneity, indigenous is also is a broad term. Here's one definition, right? Originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, um, and then of a people who have lived in the land since earlier times, right? And prior to the arrival of colonizers. Um, and Latinidad, again, another broad term, but this is one definition, right? Shared cultural, social, and historical experiences with Latin American heritage and ancestry, right? However, this blends all the diversity of cultures, languages, identities, people in Abya Yala, right? Um, and it's constructed through the erasure of indigenous languages and people and cultures, right, which are seen as obstacles to modernity, right, and development, right? And identity is a sense of who we are as individuals, right? And in social groups. Um, some examples are gender, race, ethnicity, tribal affiliation, sexual orientation, cultural background, immigration status as well, right? Those are all some examples. Um, so what does indigeneity mean to me, right? It means where I'm from, right? This is when I was born. I was born in the traditional lands of the Cocopa and Kumeyaay people, or so-called Mexicali, Baja California. On my mother's side, I'm from Jayamitla, Jalisco. My grandparents are from there. The traditional lands of the Cascan or Kashkan people. And on my father's side, I'm from El Quelite, traditional lands of the Totorames. So this is my identity, right? And within these colonial borders of the Mexican state, um, well, I'm Mexican, right? I'm Mexican, I'm a Mexican national, I'm Mexicano, Mexicane. Um, and living there and being with my grandma and with my grandma also going back to her hometown in Jayamitla, um, you know, running around in the rain, singing with other kids, playing around with kids, eating the traditional foods that are there, guamuchiles, tamales, right? Pozole, which is still, part of our foodways. Tamales is also part of my identity, right? It's also part of me. Um, and bringing back traditions as well, right? Planting corn is part of my my family. It's only a generation ago that we stopped um, planting, cultivating, and harvesting corn. And I just planted some corn earlier this week or last week, I believe. So these traditions can be brought back, right? Um, so right, Mexican national here, right? Um, and so migrations, right? In Abya, there's been migrations throughout time, right? Since time immemorial, whether it be displacement, forced migration, for better economic opportunities. Um, and so I migrated to the traditional lands of the Chumash, right? And so-called Oxnard. Then after that, to Pasadena and Rosemead, under the traditional lands of the Tongva and Quiche uh, people. So, right, labels. So who am I here now? What am I now? Now I'm Hispanic, right? I'm a person that speaks Spanish. I'm a Spanish speaker from Latin America now, right? Now I have to learn English. Now I have to learn English. There's no other way, right? I remember as a kid being put in the corner of a room because the Spanish speakers are there, right? So being assimilated into another language, right? Um, and noting that, when I was, in the Cascan traditional lands, Cascan was a language also now it was spoken, right? Cascan and Nahuatl are no longer spoken in Hayamitla, but some of the flora and the fauna still have their own traditional names. I've learned of a specific type of fig tree called higuera in Spanish, and it either has a Kashkan or Nahuatl name, and it's Kamishin. And I say Kashkan or Nahuatl because Kashkan and Nahuatl were spoken there, right, historically. Um, right, and then now I'm Latino um, because I speak Spanish, right, because I'm from Latin America. Um, and so part of this work of language where there's activism involved, it actually is one of the things that drove me to language work. I still do this. Um, so now I'm still in my migration process. Now I'm in so-called Eugene, Oregon, traditional lands of the Kalapuya people. If you see this sign here, this is Kalapuyan land. This is actually a mobile art exhibition that goes around Oregon that teaches about the Kalapuya people. There's signs at the school at the University of Oregon. Um, and some people, I don't know who it was, but they wrote not. This is not Kaipuyan land, right? So taking up space, being in protests with students, with the youth, right? Supporting that is also part of my work. Um, and when I migrated to the US, I'm an immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant. So advocating for myself, advocating for immigration rights, um, against ICE as well, protests, right? The No DAPO movement, no Dakota Access Pipeline, right? The wrecking of the land is part of the ongoing process of colonization. Colonization has not stopped. It's an ongoing process, right? And so I fall upon language work. Um, and this is all community based. My teacher, Yan Garcia, started this collective, Tlatlo Tapasoli, which means language nest, which centers not just Nahuatl, but other languages as well. So having spaces where Nahuatl as well other languages are centered is resisting in itself. Um, English, Spanish, French, even Dutch are the dominant languages in Abya Yala. Why? Well, because of colonization. Um, so it's us teaching about ourselves, right? We have people from different ages coming to our classes. Um, and through the pandemic, um, still doing that work every Sunday, right? Every Sunday, doing workshops at colleges, San Bernardino Valley colleges, UC Riverside, um, and continuing that work even at cultural centers, at autonomous spaces, specifically for queer and trans and people of color, like Flora y Tierra, right? So hosting those language workshops, right? And these conversations of identities happen in these spaces as well, and not just learning the language, right? These come up as well. Um, so that identity, so those things come up. Continuing that language work, right, with the youth, with the children. And it's all community based, right? When I was teaching, I listed some of the schools I've taught workshops at, especially with Semita's preschool. The parents were also involved, right? So learning a language also involves everyone, right? Part of the community. And through the pandemic, well, in virtual spaces, right? Um, this specific photo right here, to the right, is from El Día del Niño at la Plaza de Cultura y Artes. I remember, of course, we had games, we had, how games and coloring books about colors and a loteria game. So the kids were interested in that. What we also did is we wrote a list of some Nahuatl words that come from, some Spanish words that come from Nahuatl. Jitomate, tomate, aguacate, coyote. So the adults were actually interested in that list, right? So, and then realizing, oh yeah, that's right. It doesn't come from Spanish. It's not an English word as well, right? So learning about that, right? It helps people to realize those things, right? And maybe they went to learn something else, right? Maybe they went to go and organize a group, right, at the campus, right? And we have Dariana that did this, right? So, right, so on Zoom at different spaces, right? So Pasadena City College, Cal State Fullerton, and of people of all ages, right? People of all ages. Um, right? So that's a little bit about my work. If you want to learn more about us and the work that we do, our events, we host some free classes at times. The classes at La Plaza are still free there. So if you are in LA, you can go. And that's all. Tlaskamati, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing more about your work with us. Anthony, would you like to introduce our next speaker?
Yes. Thank you.